Okay. Thank you, everyone. Um, so the next thing we're going to do, this will take just a moment of patience and preparation. We're going to try something that a friend of mine uses a lot in her webinars. She does trainings mostly for educators around issues of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And one of the things that she's tried pretty successfully, and let's see how we do here, is she does something that's called a waterfall. And this is how it works. I'm going to ask a question and you're going to think of an answer. And I want you to type your answer in the chat, but don't hit return until I say to hit return. So we're going to do two questions to start out, just to get us sort of thinking and feeling a little bit today. Okay, so the first question is that you're going to answer is, today I feel, and like I said, I want you to type it in the chat, but don't hit return yet. Okay, so let's give everybody just a moment. Today I feel. Okay. Now, when I count to 1, you're just going to hit return. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit return. Okay. So we've got some themes here. A lot of people are feeling tired today, which I completely understand, right? It is 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't know about you. I am definitely not at my best self at 9 o'clock in the morning. A lot of people are feeling tired, but others are feeling cold, hopeful, happy. So we've got a lot of variety in the room, but I think we're tipping toward tired. So I'll definitely keep that in mind as we have our discussion. I am well caffeinated this morning and also feeling a little tired. Okay, so that was our warm up. The next question that I have, we're going to do the same thing. So you're going to type in your answer and then you're going to wait. And when I say press enter, you're going to press enter. Okay, so I'm happy to be here today, but if I could be anywhere else, I would be. And so you're going to put your answer. Where would you be if you could be anybody else today, even though you are super happy to be here in the glorious presence of all of these glorious people? Okay, let's give it just a moment. 5, 4, 3, 2, enter. Okay, back home in the Bahamas sounds amazing. A lot of people have home somewhere warm and cozy, beaches, lots of mentions of family, and a lot of traveling, a lot of activities, and then also a lot of home. And so, you know, I think that is a good and sort of like grounding reflection as well too, right? The importance of doing the things you enjoy and the importance of home, and especially when we talk about these issues of housing and fair housing, to really remember that it's all about home, right? So that is kind of where people's hearts are at, even if their minds are here in the room today. Two concepts that I just want to make sure that we are starting off with as we are going into this discussion and going into this training is, first of all, we're not here to be perfect, right? We're all here to learn. And that means that sometimes people will ask questions that they may feel uncomfortable asking, and that's okay. because once again, nobody kind of comes into this world being an expert in all things fair housing or housing discrimination. It's a really challenging issue. It's an issue that you're confronting every day in your work and in your lives. And this has to be a learning space if we want to make progress on this issue. The second concept is that when somebody is talking about their experience, it is their experience and it's very real to them. And especially when we're talking about issues related to housing discrimination, it can be very easy to think about this as what is right and wrong legally and what fits these very, and sometimes narrow definitions of what it means to experience housing discrimination. But that's not the place that we're coming from. What we're coming from is that when people say they are experiencing unfairness or discrimination in their housing, that is their truth and that is real. And so one of the things that we have to do in these discussions is really kind of have an open mind in terms of people talking about their experiences and what they're doing. So before we hop into the panel, and I want to make sure all of our panelists are here as well. But one of the things that I want to do is just recap a couple of things from our last training. In particular, just fair housing in those protected classes. So we talked about this a lot last time, and that was that the Fair Housing Act explicitly prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status. And that discrimination manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it is intentional discrimination, or what we call kind of like that smoking gun that you see. But a lot of what we see is disparate impact. So even if a policy or a practice isn't on its face discriminatory, that it has a disproportionate negative impact on somebody from a protected class. That's what we see more often than not as we operate in this housing system that is designed in a way, unintentionally or intentionally, to create impacts that are disproportionately harmful to people of the protected classes that I listed. So that is kind of where we're at as far as that's concerned. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to have we have a number of folks who've joined us as special guests today who are renters who are going to be talking a little bit about their experiences interacting with and operating within the housing system. Today we have with us Lovetea, Linda, and let's see if she's here yet, and Karina. Karina, are you on the line? Okay. Karina isn't here yet. She should be joining us shortly. Who do we have on the phone with us?
I'm here, Margaret. That's me.
Oh, great, great, great. I was thinking that for a moment. I was like, no, did I lose somebody along the way? But
Nope,
thank you so
that's me.
much for
Good
being
morning.
here.
You're welcome.
And Lovetea, I see that you are on the line.
Yep. I'm
Great,
good, my friend.
great, great. And then Linda, have you been able to sign in? Okay, well, hopefully Linda will be able to join us in just a moment. I know that she is planning on being here, but we'll kind of start off with where we are. And one of the things that I wanted to do is just have a couple people who can talk a little bit about their experiences interacting with the housing system and with various forms of government as they've been trying to address issues within their own communities. And I'm going to start off with a question to Karina. And Karina, what I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask the same question of everybody just to start off. Why did you contact the city? What was it about? And what were your expectations when you contacted the city?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Karina. And to that question, I contacted the city off of default. When I started my housing fight, we didn't know who to call. I didn't know who to call. And the city kind of, was the last, draw for what we, the residents, were going through. And so when I finally had made that interaction with the city of Minneapolis, and that's departments like regulatory services, CPAD, 311, the health department. To be fair, we were led in a circle and we was talked to off like with a script. And our expectations was to fight this housing justice, get justice from, the experiences that we were experiencing. We experienced, my hands are tied and, we experienced, give them a chance. And my expectations again was that we wanted justice. We wanted some fixing. And working with the city of Minneapolis for years with our housing crisis, we got nothing. And we didn't even get the bare minimum. We got the door slammed in our face, and the city of Minneapolis do not help renters. And that really scares me. So yes, that answers your question.
Yeah, and Karina, just as a little bit of background, can you talk a little bit about the reason, the issue why you contacted the city? What were you and your neighbors seeing or experiencing that led you to pick up that phone to begin with?
In our fight, our experience, we were seeing, mismanagement. We were experiencing retaliation. And we, again, contacted the city, which is the regulatory services, to get leadership. And that experience and that outcome was, again, the door closed on our faces. And the renters got to the point now they don't trust the system. They didn't feel like the system, or to this day, will help them or serve them. So, again, it's not a safe place to know that people who pose to work for you don't work for you. And the system doesn't either. So, yeah, so that's how that was.
So Lefty, can you talk a little bit about what you were seeing or experiencing at Georgetown Apartments? Kind of like, what was the issue that you and your neighbors were working on? And then the kind of the same question: why did you contact the city, and what were your expectations when you contacted them?
Thank you, Margaret. My name is Lofty Polam. I am tenant organizer at Georgetown Complex in Brooklyn Center. So when I moved to Brooklyn Center, my experience with my apartment as compared to other neighbors, we were experiencing a lot of maintenance issues. We were experiencing our kitchen sink not working, our toilet putting out feces, and more to it, it was a lot of issue like dirty carpets, carpet rips, and all the kind of stuff. And the frustrating thing about it was whenever we contacted the landlords to come and do maintenance work, we don't get them until like after 3, 4, 5 days. And we try organize ourselves because we're experiencing the same thing, one from each person to another person. It was just the same issue. And then we were paying our rent on time. And then they were increasing the rent, but they were not doing nothing. So we organized ourselves as consent tenants, and we said that we're going to create an email for them. So we created a chat. We were meeting every week. We wrote the landlords. They came. They had a meeting with us. They never did anything. We were still experiencing this issue until we contacted the city. To my greatest surprise, the city did nothing. I think with your questions that says discrimination, I think I experienced it a little bit, because they just think that certain type of people should live in certain type of places, like substandard places, apartments complex that is very old, dirty. Certain type of people should just live there. Maybe I would say because I'm a brown skin color woman, so every time I make a request, they don't listen to me as compared to other people. I think I would say that it's a retaliation, and this is really discriminative. So on and on, we kept pursuing our goals. We said we cannot pay rent, and our apartment complex is not worth safe for us and our kids. My daughter and my son were getting rashes on their skin. And when I went to the doctor, it was proving that it's because of where they live. I don't know, maybe they have taken something on the floor and they eat and all that kind of stuff. So I got all the evidence. I sent it to the city. The city did nothing about it. All right. So we started the fight. We protest. We went to the office. We did everything to make sure that we have maintenance come over. So they will send people to come and look at it, but when it comes, they don't do nothing. After they fix XYZ, the next day another stuff come up. So it was literally like we was living in that place for 3 years. I was there living in that place, no peace of mind, maintenance issue every single day, and they don't have no good way of talking to people. They don't have no good reception, no whatever you think about, no customer service. Because if you're paying for a service, you should receive a better service with your earned money that you work for. But we were not seeing anything of that nature. So just to answer your question, Margaret, I will tell you that the city really don't contribute a lot when it comes to tenants, safety, when it comes to housing. The city don't contribute. They will only come and just look at the paper that they have, and they say they come to do inspection. When you tell them this is what affected me, they will say, okay, we'll relate to your landlords. But then you relate to the landlord don't do anything. So I think the city should be able to go above and beyond, not being discriminative, but make sure people are healthy in their apartments. Make sure that all of those material they have in there, like maybe the bathroom tub should work. The toilet should be able to work. The kitchen sink should not be able to overflow to the extent where your carpet will even get wet. You and your kids are walking on a wet carpet for days. And then when you call somebody to help you out, they dry the carpet, the apartment complex cannot even refund the money. I mean, these are issues, Margaret, I'm telling you, I went through. They will tell me we are not responsible to clean your carpet. Okay, but I'm about to sign another lease. I need a new carpet, and I need somebody to come and wash my carpet. They will tell me, no, you are responsible. And when I take the case to the city, they will tell me, landlords are not responsible to wash your carpet. Like, for real. So landlord causes the damage, but landlord cannot fix the damage. So these are issues I think renters are struggling with, and cities are being discriminated because they feel that certain type of people, in my own experience, should live in a dirty place. I'm sorry for that word, but I think the thing, certain type of people should be able to live in a dirty place. And not everybody can afford a home right now. All right. The situation everybody go through is not as compared to other people. So I think I think everyone should be treated equally. Once you sign up a list and you pay your money to live somewhere safe, you should be able to live safe, and city should be able to protect the tenants, not landlord. I think that's my point.
Thank you, Lefty. Karina, another question for you. You know, I know that you've been very active working with your neighbors, and you've contacted a lot of different folks about the issues that you were experiencing at Madison Apartments. I'm wondering, uh, what what do you think are the barriers? What prevents people from contacting someone when they feel like they're being discriminated against or they feel like they're being treated unfairly in their housing?
You said what prevents them to not call?
What prevents people from calling somebody,
Oh.
whether it's the city or it's the department, like the Minneapolis Department of Human Rights or HUD? What are the things that stop people from contacting someone when they feel like they are being discriminated against or when they feel like they're being treated unfairly?
Yeah. So our fight here at Madison was very interesting. Towards the beginning, you know, again, we didn't know who to contact. So when we finally got in tune to who to call, and we were believing who was going to help us, a lot of us was in disbelief that they wasn't going to help us, but when we finally did call and we had residents to call, to not only tell them to call, but also approach them and say, hey, you have rights. These are the people who you should call. You know, if you call, I promise you won't get evicted. You know, they're not going to do anything. Well, we found out that that wasn't so true. And so in that process, we had tenants calling, and right away the tenants were, experiencing this, retaliation. They were experiencing discrimination, and it was mostly retaliation from the management company. And they put the barriers up of telling us that we had to call people according to the chain of command. And that was, very disrespectful to the residents. And that barrier locked a lot of us out because the residents didn't understand why that was happening. And so a lot of the Somali residents that I live with, they started shutting down and didn't trust the system. We were back again, not trusting what was the process. And so the barriers kind of locked us all out because those same organizations were also telling us that we had to contact them off a chain of a command. And we were feeling a little disbelief, like, what? Like, you get paid to work with us, this is your job. And so those barriers were the barriers that locked us out, turned their back on us, and didn't support the renters in this building. And so that was the barriers that we faced, and we still face, that we have to contact people according to protocol. So we got to deal with management. They not going to do nothing. And then we deal with the rest of it when they tell us to. So those are the barriers, but the city of Minneapolis helped those barriers, not contacting them and responding to the residents at Madison Apartments.
Thank you, Karina.
You're welcome.
Lefty, I'm wondering, what's something that you saw either in the work that you did within your own community or somewhere else, because you've talked with a lot of different people who are doing organizing in their own buildings, that you think would have improved the situation? Are there any things that you think would have helped as you tried to get these issues addressed?
One thing I can point out was evictions. I think we work as team, and we said that we're going to city council meeting with the help of an organization called ISA. So we went to that meeting. We said people were suffering from eviction, and we never wanted them to lose their homes because people that were struggling with eviction were mothers with kids. Why if they loses their home, where would the kids go to school again? How would the kids live and all that kind of stuff? So we saw all this situation. That was why we went to city council, and we gave them our petition. We said this is the reason why we want you guys to make sure that people don't be evaded from their homes. And one of the things that we saw was the just cause was passed at that time when we wanted it. So people were not evaded. I think that was one of the strength we really work on, and we got it done. And besides, at my complex where I was, there were a lot of towings. There were a lot of towings, towing a randomly for no reasons. Even if a car is parked at a handicap parking, they were just coming to that car for no reason. There was a lady in my building that was having this issue. She just had an accident and she got wounded with her leg. So she had this handicap sticker on her car, and then the complex said that it wasn't there. So they went and towed the lady car. The lady car was towed for maybe, I would say, 41 days. Yes. And then we went to city council. We told them we needed this lady car because that was the only car she had at the time. She didn't have any other car. She was a single mom. But long story short, after we did this, they freed the lady car, and that was not the only thing the post stopped to towing. And we organized ourselves to meet the landlord. When we got there, we told him, we are not stopping you from towing, but all we want is that we want a boundary. To not tow a random day during the day. We want you to tow our cars at least 11 o'clock in the night while everybody going to bed. And that was said and done. It was signed. So up to this time, there's no towing. And evasion, like I said, you cannot evict a tenant here in Brooklyn Center without tangible reasons. You must have a tangible reasons, right? Either maybe something went wrong, you saw some criminal act or so, maybe it can be investigated by the court and for some reason, but not just evict somebody and say you're going out today and then the person just lose their home. No. So these are some of the things that we work on that I saw that was already done, Margaret. And but quote unquote, the struggle still continue with maintenance issue. All right. Like I said, we have all these maintenance issues when they come in to fix either maybe your tub or your kitchen sink or your toilet or something they come to do. The next day, Margaret, the same thing happened. You will still have that stove not working. You will still have that bathroom clogged and on and on. I think so far so good. Those were the two issues that we really work on and we saw happen, and it still exists now as I'm speaking as a tenant organizer.
Thank you, Lefty. Um, so, Karina, another question for you. Um, so you've been working on issues at Madison Apartments and on housing issues in the city of Minneapolis in general for a really long time, and talked to a lot of different residents, a lot of different buildings. What is one piece of advice that you would give to city and county staff about how to respond when they receive a call from somebody who is experiencing problems with their housing?
That's a good one. I would tell them that this could be you. this could be you. But I would tell them to listen. Listen. They're human and they have a right to be heard. I would tell them to have the open mind because what is happening in the housing is real. I would tell them a lot of things, and it kind of all depends on who the person is because they probably even get a little cuss word too. But I would tell them, to have an open mind, listen to what the tenants are saying. They're going through a lot, and this is their last straw of contacting you. So, have that open mind, listen, go out there. Don't, tell them you're going to contact the landlord because that's when they're going to shut down. And yeah, just listen and have an open mind because these stories are real.
Thank you, Karina.
You're welcome.
Um, so, Lefty, same
Yeah.
question for you. As you think about it and, what you were working through at Georgetown, and, and for that matter, your housing today, what's one piece of advice that you would give to city and staff, county staff, about how to respond when somebody contacts them about housing issues?
I think they should respond promptly and on time. I think one of the issue that we had too when we were struggling to meet with city staff on these maintenance issue that we're struggling with, their line are always busy. You cannot call one person and just get there at a time, to be honest with you. There were times we'll stay on the line for like 30 minutes before somebody will be able to pick up the call and say, what are you calling for? And you try to explain to them, they will tell you what the person that's supposed to answer your question is on lunch or is not here. So I think that was a big part of it. They should be able to respond to residents' call on time. They should have enough staff responding to emails because sometimes you email them, they take time to respond and on and on. These people are paid for their job. They should be able to work adequately in the interest of the tenant, not the landlord. So I personally, in my own, but as tenant organizer, with my own experience that I have with them, they are not reachable as soon as possible. They are not. They are not. So they should be able to sit with themselves and think, who is rather going to be responsible to deal with tenants? We cannot call and tell us somebody go on lunch, the person that have to do with a problem go on lunch or whatever it is. I think that was not fair to us and they should stop it. So if I call you and you know you're responsible for inspection or whatever it is, I'm calling my landlords, I cannot get to them, and you are the last person I'm depending on, you should be able to respond to my call promptly. All right. And the second part of it is we should be able to elect people in our value. When I mean people in our value, what I mean is that people who are in the interest of tenants. Because if you look on Margaret, you will see that a lot of people that are in city council that's working in city council inspection unit, you will find out that these people are not in our interest, they are in the interest of landlords. So most of the time when you call them and complain of property owner not responding to maintenance issue, they kind of side with them because they are not in your interest. But if the tenants will, elect people that are in our value, who know what it means to be a tenant, you're struggling to work and pay your rent. I think these people will be able to work in our interest. So that is to just say that, I'm not being political, but I'm just saying that leaders should be in the interest, especially city staff who are responsible for housing, should be in the interest of tenants, not landlords, because they receive big money from landlords And so whatever the landlord tells them, that's what they do. What I'm trying to say, for example, if you go to sign a lease, they will not make you read through the lease. They will just tell you, this is for this is for this, sign. And you sign. You got time to read all the rules and regulations they put over there because you probably rushing to go into your apartment. Now, when you get into the apartment and they come to you and say you break the lease. How did I break the lease? Oh, you're not supposed to let your children play at this point. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that. I'm sorry I'm taking your time, but this is just too much. We need to talk about it, and the time is not enough, But I mean, city staff should be able to respond promptly to our request.
Yeah, and as someone said in the chat, this is really important, and take all the time you need to say what you're trying to say, because I think it's really important for folks to hear that.
Yeah, because the reason, sorry, Margaret, the reason I'm saying this, because I work with tenants, right? I know the frustration. I know what we went through. We did door knocking to organize people. And in this country, to organize people that working is hard. So people leave their duty, they leave their job to come and listen to what you have to tell them. Only at the end of the day, we work so hard and get nothing. It's hard. It's hard. It's a cycle. It's something that goes around. The other leadership leave from there, another person come and does the same old thing. Tenants continue to suffer. And most of the time, the decision we make, it affects people. It affects them because the people that already suffer, not the rich people, Margaret, are the common people that suffered. That very single mom with her kids that just working back to back and don't even have time for the kids. These are the people that suffer. So when people are making decisions on housing, especially housing, they should be able to make good decisions that will benefit, the tenants. But we have not had that in the past. I just hope that this time around, there'll be a lot of changes on those leases, When you go to sign a lease, it will be in the interest of you, not in the interest of them, because you can be paying your money at the same time it's against you. So a carpet is supposed to be on the floor, for example, for 4 years, according to what I heard. All right? Or 5 years. But you understand that you sign a lease and walk into a place where for all carpet are already been there for 10 years. And then you try to advocate for yourself and tell them that I need my carpet change. They don't want to do it. Instead of doing it, they are retaliating against you. When you push forward to go to city council meeting, you don't get anything. They just talk, and they do nothing. It's frustrating. It is.
Thank you,
I
Lupton.
second everything she said, Margaret.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask Karina if you could talk a little bit more about the role that retaliation played in sort of the ups and downs of the organizing at Madison, because I know that was a huge factor.
Yeah. First, I will say this, that I commend her. I've heard her voice a couple of times, and her passion, her fight is in her voice. And a lot of us organizers, we appreciate that. A lot of people, tell us to take a break and, calm down. But her fight is strong, and I so appreciate you, sister. And it's a lot of work that goes into this organizing, and it messes with our lives because it's an emotional fight. And I'm getting emotional because it's like I'm bringing up everything all over again with Madison. And this stuff is real. The city of Minneapolis, local government should be ashamed of themselves. We go through so much trying to prove facts, prove what's happening in these slum condition housing, from HUD to Minnesota Housing to the health department, the state department, the mayor, city council, and it shouldn't be this hard. So I commend this woman for talking in frustration and showing her love for the residents. And I show my love for the residents in my building. And to answer your question, for the retaliation was for things like, don't call Margaret. If you do, we get a lease violation. The retaliation was, don't contact HUD. If you do, you're gonna, get a write-up, or they was doing things like not doing our work order repairs and, spreading rumors and about whatever, and the retaliation was also a lot of evictions, and those evictions that they was giving tenants out of threat, that was really harming them mentally because the residents here didn't know what to do. And so when we would contact the city about these retaliation and discrimination behaviors from management, the regulatory services did not help us. And that made me so angry because we felt lost in this fight of housing. And we didn't get the proper respect as tenants to say, hey, this stuff is happening. Help us. The last straw was to go to the news. But I knew living with immigrant families, I knew the frustration of them thinking that they will always get, you'll always get evicted. And I knew that was our last straw, but I knew it had no power in it because they got bullied so bad that the tenants stopped fighting. They stopped fighting. So we didn't lose the fight. We just lost the war, to be honest with you, because the tenants here were upset, they were angry, they were sad, they was emotional. We were all emotional wrecks when the fire went out with our organizing. The fire went out in every single person here. And that retaliation stuff that happens in housing, we need policy for that. We need policy to go in for retaliation because that stuff is dangerous and it is easy to prove in court. Look at these tenants' faces when you go to their houses and you talking to them out of frustration. They're tired. We're always tired. We're crying. We're tired. We freaking are exhausted from the behavior that we all witness on a daily basis. None of these stories are lies. They're the fucking truth. Excuse my language. But we're tired. The city of Minneapolis needs to be sued to the top of the mountaintops. Because what they're doing to us mentally and our health-wise is not right. And I want to say this before we go to the next question. I sent this email to Mayor Fry, and I was on a call with one of our housing committees. I said, hello, everyone. I am Karina T. Bowler. I stand before you all today as a servant to housing justice. I'm a mother of 5 amazing young Black men, and I'm a force that screams for justice and equality. I want to read you my cry as we end this call today. I'm learning a tough lesson today and every day that not every fight is my fight, and not every story is my story, or do they look the same. I've been the screams on the calls. I've been the screams in your emails. I am the burn the house down type of warrior that screams for housing justice. We're all here today to hear the truth to power for housing justice. Not sure how many of you know that I sit on the City of Minneapolis Housing Committee for the last 4 years. I know that the City of Minneapolis can do more for its renters. I can't sit by and listen to people who have no care for renters, especially low-income renters, anymore. My integrity and commitment to real reform is now. I'm using my seat to challenge the status quo. I'm on the right side trying to balance the scales and watch the checks and balances. My road to equality is long, but there is no one path. Right now, today, it's going to take all of us to turn our protests into progress. We can all make a difference. I am an asset to my community, and I challenge you all to continue to stand tall in this fight. And I am Karina T. Bowler. Thank you. That's what I sent them. And I never got a response.
Well, thank you for sharing those words. That was amazing. That was great and so powerful. So we've got a couple of minutes. If there are other folks who want to ask a question of either of our panelists, first of all, and people can either ask or they can put it in the chat. Thank you both, by the way, for sharing your stories, and just to let folks know that we don't expect people to do this for free either. So people are receiving a stipend for sharing their stories and spending their time here with us. But I also just want to say above and beyond that how much we value it. Does anybody have any questions for Karina or Lufti, or is there something else, Karina or Lufti, either of you want to add? Okay.
Want to say thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be here this morning. And I just want people to know that what renters go through is so much, and us organizers, we take on a lot too, a lot of stress from this fight. And it's a lot. It's definitely a lot, but I thank you guys for having me this morning.
Any questions from anyone? So here's a question. What would a good experience with city staff look like to you?
Doing their job.
Anything you want to add to that, more specific? Like say, I mean, you pick up the phone, you call someone, what do you want?
Yeah, doing their job, getting out, really holding these property owners accountable, really doing the citations that they should be doing, really focusing on taking these license inspections really seriously, and stop, cherry picking, what property owners they want to, hold accountable. Just overall, just doing their jobs. That's what you're getting paid to do, is to do your job. So making sure that they are calling renters back, making sure that they are out here doing what they are supposed to be doing. So, yeah.
Lefty, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Margaret. Before I come up with my own piece of this question, I would like to ask a question. What is the definition for city inspection? As a city inspector, what am I going to do? What am I going to look for? I think if they answer this question, they will make their job more like easier for themselves. Because the thing is, what we expect from them when you come with that paper in your hand, you should make sure you're not just checking for electrical appliances. You should make sure you're also asking the tenants, is there any other thing that you think I need to know? Let them be able to explain to you, this is what I'm facing. Oh, my carpet is dirty. Oh, I need this. Oh, I need that. Oh, I need the rent to come down because I live in this place for a certain amount of time and this is what I've been experiencing and I think I'm paying my rent on time. It's not fair for me. Take your note, carry it to your office, make some suggestions during your meetings. Tell them we wait for inspection. This is why we did, even though we had this on our paper, but I think we need to extend our inspection to this. If they do that, then they be human, like what Corina said. We are human. We live in the apartment complexes. We're not animals. Not because we don't own our own homes. All right, we are human like yourself. Be human. Do your job. You cannot just come and say, can I see where the heat comes from? Why your bed is so closer to the vendor? That's not only the job you came to do. Check the carpet. How long? Go to landlord, edit them or order them, whatever it is. How long this carpet be on this floor? It's not healthy for the kids that live in here. You need to change it. I'm coming back in 2 months. If this carpet is not changed, you're not going to pass. Make sure find them. Let them pay enough money. And when you go to any apartment complex that passes the inspection, you drop their taxes. And increase the one who did not pass. That's how you do it. If you continue to do this in Minneapolis, I think Minneapolis will have a better, housing platform. Because the thing is, that old lease, that particular old lease, they still have it and printing it over and over to another tenant. So the way to get rid of the old lease or the old leases is to amend them and add on new ones that benefit the tenants. So it's no more like, okay, this freezer has been here for 2 years. You check the expiry date, the freezer is old or the refrigerator is old, whatever it is. This refrigerator cannot be here for the next 2 years. You have to change it. I think when we start doing these things, we will know that city inspection are doing their job. So for me, I expect them to go above and beyond. When you come for inspection, be able to listen to the person that lives in that unit. Is there any other thing I need to know? Let them be able to tell you, write it down on your paper, get to office, discuss it with your boss, and see how you can take it from there. But every other time, you only come in to check for electrical appliances. It's not right. So I think they need to adjust their memo or whatever it says concerning housing. They need to adjust it and make better improvement on it. And thank you so much, Mark. Like I said, already 10 o'clock. Like I said, I can say this thing over and over and over and over. I won't get tired. All right, because that's my job. I believe in good housing. I believe in making people happy. And then one day I'm going to be one of the leaders of this city and I'm going to set things straight. Honestly, that's one of my dreams. I'm telling you now. All right. So I just want to thank you for having me here. Not so much of this topic, but this is what I love to do. I love to earn my grievances. I love to advocate for people who are less fortunate, people who don't have the time to do it. I like to do it for them. And I like to see better things. I like to see people doing their job. I like to see tenants living happy. All right. So it's not about, me being a tenant and I don't have my own home. So because I'm a tenant, so you're just going to treat me like a trash. No. All right. So if everybody go and buy homes, how will they not make money? Who's going to live in apartment complexes? So let us make the apartment complex as nice and beautiful as our home too. Thank you so much, Margaret.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lofty.
Margaret, I wanted to add to that too.
Yeah.
I would say one good thing out of organizing that I've done for, our own sanity is a part that many don't talk about is, how we host award ceremonies for, the tenants and, the organizer people who helped us along the way. And that became our happy place. And that was the part, what I was in charge of because I was listed as the director of communication and outreach. And I made sure that we had a moment, to celebrate not only, our movement, but ourselves. And that was what the tenants looked forward to. Out of all the thunderstorms and all the dark clouds that was over us, within this fight, we found a moment that we could just celebrate ourselves and, and just be happy in that moment. So like hosting the backpack events, hosting the award ceremonies, and hosting, maybe a child's birthday or something like that. Like that part right there gave us a lot of joy and the residents looked so forward to those days. And so I just wanted to add, that's a part of the work that was important to us, that when we got a hold of that, nobody wanted to let that go. So I just wanted to say that was a part of the, the joy and the journey that comes along with organizing for us families.
Thank you. Well, and for folks who are interested in supporting some of that work, I know that Karina is working on their upcoming coat and toy drive right now. This has been kind of hard year for getting folks to donate. So I can share that link with folks. So if you want to get a hold of Karina and donate some toys or coats to help their efforts along. Well, thank you so much, Karina and Lefty, for spending your time with us and for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. I think it's really important for folks to hear that. So before we break into breakouts, just wanting to kind of ground us a couple of things in some of the themes that we heard from Levty and Karina, and I'm sure some of the things that you're seeing every day in the work that you're doing. And that is frequently when people are contacting the city about issues that are related to their housing, they're not necessarily flagging it as discrimination. They're coming to the city about these very practical issues. And frequently discrimination will come up within that, but issues like property maintenance, parking, and issues related to the approaches to public safety. Um, I would say that at least in what we see, those are very, very sort of like common themes in the types of issues that people will approach us about. And one of the things that I think very frequently folks in communities, in cities, and on staff are sort of asked to do or required to do as you think about all of these issues is something that's called issue spotting. So when a person in housing in a community sees something that's going on in their unit, they may not know what's happening to everybody else in the building. You know, whether it's something to do with maintenance, whether it's something to do with just treatment of renters in general, whether it's something to do with towing practices. And it's very frequently city staff, in particular people who are looking at issues related to property condition and property inspections, who are in the best position to recognize when something is not just about what's happening to an individual, but a practice that exists across a property. And so you're coming into a lot of these interactions with people with a different set of information than the individual who is contacting the city is going to have. And that's really important because when we think about these issues of discrimination, some of it is based on an individual household, but a lot of it is a practice that's happening sort of across the building. Likewise, city staff are also in a really good position to know not just how people in one building are being treated, but how people are being treated in different buildings, sometimes owned by the same property owner or the same landlord. And so that's another place where you can either see patterns that exist kind of across somebody's portfolio. So this isn't just an occurrence or that person thinks that, but really something that is existing for different people across properties. The other thing that city staff are frequently in the position of being able to recognize or to know a piece of information that you have that others might not have, who are organizing in their own building, is if a property owner is treating different buildings with different tenant populations differently. And so one of the things that we have run into periodically are issues where one building that say predominantly folks from the Somali community, that building is being treated differently or is in vastly different condition, or they're responding differently than another building that is predominantly home to, say, white renters, right? And so in the position of being at a city where you're getting information from a lot of different places, sometimes you have an opportunity to see or connect dots that renters organizing their own building might just not have the same kinds of information that you do. So that's one thing that just kind of struck me and what people were saying in terms of what a city's role is. The second, which I think is really a very important, is, and I think both of our speakers talked about this, is that when people are contacting the city, a lot of times they're very scared and they're very frustrated. They know that they've been treated unfairly and don't necessarily know where to go or where to turn. And sometimes, like, that translates to people being angry. And that is completely understandable. And so, as we think about and respond to the kinds of questions or inquiries that come in, that is a muscle that I think people have to flex, which is understanding the difference between somebody being angry at an unjust situation and somebody being angry at you as an individual. It is very rarely about you as an individual, right? They don't know you yet. And so that first interaction, I think sometimes is going to be really challenging for whoever is picking up that phone. And at the same time, that person is a person who lives in the community. They are a citizen of your community. They are a renter in your community. They contribute to the community. They are of value to your community. And it can be very challenging to put aside sort of that personal feeling of like, somebody's yelling at me. But really, we need to make sure that whatever that interaction is, we're treating people with respect. And sometimes when that doesn't happen, it manifests itself in some very strange ways, including, negative comments made about renters in general, or negative comments made at, let's say, city working group meetings or city council meetings, talking about renters as being the problem when there are problems associated with a property, as opposed to being people who are having the closest set of experiences with problems that are not of their own making. And so that can be, once again, I think, a challenge for folks, both in terms of how you create systems or environments where people feel like they can raise these issues within the city, but also making sure that people in city staff are protecting their own emotional well-being, but not at the expense of meeting the needs of communities. So with that, we are going to break out into some groups. This is going to be a little bit of a process of trial by fire as we try and break people into groups. But we have a couple questions that we want people to kind of talk about with each other, and then we'll come back and we'll report back. So here are a couple instructions. First, when you get into your group, please choose somebody who is going to be the note taker and somebody who is going to be reporting back to the big group. And we're going to be giving people about half an hour. So it's plenty of time for people to talk. But that very first thing you need to do is choose who's taking notes and who's going to report back. Because if we don't do those things first, they aren't going to happen. The second is I want you to discuss a few questions in the groups, and we're not going to be super directive with this, but we're all coming from different places, from different levels of government, cities, counties, individuals, and based on both your experiences in your work every day and also what you heard from our community experts in the last panel. What we want people to talk about is, first, how does your city or your jurisdiction respond when somebody contacts you about an issue? what are the policies and practices that are in place today related to that help guide the way you respond to people? And then thinking about that based on the conversation, what are things that you wish you had in place as a city, or that you think you need to do as a city or a county or other jurisdiction, that would help make it easier when people call the city to feel like they are being treated justly and fairly, and that their issues are on a path to being resolved? Now, our groups are going to be pretty big. We've got groups of, I think, 8 or 7. Like I said, pick your note taker, pick your reporter. People are going to have about 30 minutes. We'll give people a warning. If folks are in your groups and you've run out of things to talk to, let me know. And I'll also be kind of checking in with people as well, too. And this is a good opportunity for you both to share the good things that you as a city are doing, because people are doing a lot of really great stuff in terms of the way that they're responding to folks, but also to kind of recognize what some of those kind of gaps, challenges, missing pieces are as you think about how you would respond when somebody contacts you with some of these types of issues. So, does everybody feel clear on what they are going to be doing for the next 30 minutes? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. How are people feeling? Okay.
I'm Shay. We're with the city of Brooklyn Park. I have Brenda, William, Sarah, and Keith, and our lovely panelists. I want to make sure I'm saying your name correctly. Our lovely panelist, Karina. I think some things that that were lovely is that it was really cool to talk about our program, our door knocking program, with engaging directly with residents in Brooklyn Park, in different apartment complexes, and working on building like relationships with property managers and owners, and working alongside them for responding to issues, and just kind of seeing some more timely work being done within that project. And I think some things that we noted as I think you said, Margaret, like more like, I wish, like, what can we do more of? It's just having more tangible things, and implementing more tangible tools for support. So like what we talked about, inspections, like modifying our inspection process, figuring out if there's some tools where, you know, that we can utilize where if units aren't, you know, in a feasible condition, seeing if there's some things that we can explore and moving forward in 2023. So still trying to see if maybe, you know, of course, trying to work alongside folks, but if there's some more tools that we can utilize in addressing immediate needs, like right now. Would y'all say that captured it accurate? Please, Sarah, Brenda, anyone feel free to jump in and add any to note, or feel free to jump it in the chat, or if I said anything incorrectly, please feel free to correct. But yeah, I think that's a bit of our conversation.
Thank you. Group 2.
Yes, hello, this is Rob Hansen from City of Minnetonka. We had a small group. In my group, we also had Brianne from Brooklyn Park, and then also Tegan from Brooklyn Park. So it was the 3 of us. So in response to the first question, how does your city respond when somebody contacts you about an issue? So for the City of Minnetonka, it's really more of a complaint-based type of response. We actually don't have a rental licensing or inspection program at the city. We're one of the few cities that still doesn't have that. So people would contact us, the Community Development Department. We have myself and 2 other staff that would be sort of the voice for housing issues in the city here. You know, if there's really an issue that might be health related, or something that could be significant health issue, we would refer that to our environmental health department to investigate, or if there's a real structural or building issue, we would refer those to our building department. But in terms of more landlord tenant disputes, legal issues, that sort of thing, we really rely on partner organizations to help tenants. So we refer folks to organizations like Homeline or other service providers here that we work with in the West Metro to deal with issues related to landlords. Brooklyn Park, they have a robust rental licensing program. They have a series of rental inspectors that go out and look at properties. Their environmental health department would get involved on a case-by-case basis if any issues are brought to their attention. The rental inspectors reach out to property managers or owners to resolve the issue, and then follow up with an inspection to make sure that there's compliance. If there's a fair housing violation, and I think this would go for Minnetonka as well, we would direct people to, or if somebody wants to make a complaint regarding fair housing, we would refer them to HUD or the state in order to formally launch a complaint and have that investigated. And then we also had some ideas about policies and practices that would make it easier for folks to respond fairly and justly. So Minnetonka, I think, down the line would be considering a rental licensing program. We would have proactive inspectors. I think between Brooklyn Park felt the same way, where maybe inspectors would be actually going out and being a little bit more proactive in contacting residents and finding out if there's any issues that they have with their property. We did discuss potential for surprise rental inspections. So, but we did think that there could be some problematic issues with scheduling. And then just more anecdotal conversation type, asking, is there anything else that's bothering you about your housing? So being a little bit more open and friendly to residents and having more of a casual conversation with folks to find out what types of issues that they're facing. And then also making sure that we're being responsive and making sure that we are able to get back to folks that have complaints within 24 hours. And that's it.
Great. Thank you. Group 3.
Hello, my name is Val with the City of Wayzata. I'm here with Megan from the City of Wayzata, and we also met with Linda from the Housing Justice Board and Paul from, I think it was Dakota County, and Alex from Brooklyn Park. So I think, at this rate, I think everybody had a Brooklyn Park person, which is great. In terms of question 1, we had sort of a range of answers just because the sizes of our cities and jurisdictions are so incredibly different. One of the things that some of our larger cities were running into was, knowing exactly who to connect to and how they end up with that person. Is there strong training sort of at the front desk, or whoever sort of, takes care of that main phone line? Do they know to get who the most effective person for each problem is? The website can be a resource for that, but, sometimes can be difficult to put all the information you want to be front and center, actually front and center. In Wayzata specifically, some of what we talked about was, not necessarily having the people. We're a very small group of people, and one of the things we run into occasionally is that individually we don't necessarily have the authority or the teeth to actually take enforcement action on a lot of these items. It's typically another agency, but we also don't necessarily want to feel like we're punting an issue either. So it can be tough to make sure that the person who calls us knows they're going to get an answer or a resolution when we're not necessarily the people who can provide that. For the second question, again, a range. I think for us, a lot of what we're doing is sort of just our best practices and what's worked for us in the time that our sort of group has worked together, but isn't necessarily like written down as a policy. And one of our sort of take home items from this meeting is actually writing some of it down because, the same people won't be here forever. So let's build a policy that works. And similar with our larger cities, talking about, you know, having that sort of that clear chain of command about where people end up, that's most effective for them. And then in terms of the third question, we ended up talking about, again, being clear about who people end up with, but also how relationships with property owners dovetail with broader community engagement efforts on the part of the city. I know part of my job, I'm actually more of on the city planning side of things. A lot of the outreach that I do is around potential development or that sort of thing. And, you know, so there may be, you know, outreach to multifamily residents and property owners as a result of that, but that's not necessarily coordinated with any you know, relationships that may be being built around enforcement action on those properties. So how do you sort of build a more holistic relationship where, you know, a property owner is familiar with, like, these are the people who will, you know, direct me to do the correct thing on behalf of my tenants, but also have a relationship in terms of ongoing community engagement and that sort of thing. So how to take a look at how individuals have a more holistic relationship with the city instead of siloing that as aggressively as a lot of cities do now. And that's it.
Thank you. Group 4.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm with the City of Eden Prairie. In our group, we had both Minneapolis and St. Paul employees, and then myself from a mid-sized suburb. And I think the thing that stuck out the most in our conversation was particularly in some of our larger cities, that there's a lot of either lack of communication between departments or lack of coordination that can be really frustrating for both staff and residents alike, that staff don't always know who the best resource is for one another internally to help direct residents to, and that translates to frustration for residents as well. And so some of the solutions that were generated around services like 311, where there is a person that's trained to really understand the roles of different staff. Another suggestion that I heard was also some internal staff profiles, so that staff have a kind of a quick guide to figure out who the best person to connect with is. And it was interesting for me because I represent the mid-size suburb in the group. And I think sometimes cities our size kind of hit a sweet spot where we have enough staff that we have humans filling these roles, but that we're small enough that we all know each other quite well. Because in our city, it looks a little bit different where we have our fire department doing our rental inspections, and they handle the city code side of things. And then I work in the Office of Housing and Community Services, where I handle a lot of our non-city code. So referrals to Homeline or helping with things that impact quality of life, but may not be covered under our health and safety inspections sort of rule and enforcement guidebook. And so I haven't experienced a lot of that frustration with the communication because I think mainly due to our size. And so it's interesting to kind of compare and contrast what that looks like in cities of different sizes and caseloads and staff management processes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good, that's a really important observation as well that we've heard from a couple of folks. And that is, you know, this question about, you know, what cities at different sizes, like there are very unique challenges, whether it's about internal communication or about staff capacity or all of the above, and figuring out, you know, how within the capacity of your individual jurisdiction, you put the things in place that make it accessible for folks, kind of regardless of what that size is, but that looks very different depending on the size of your community. Up next, group 5.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button there. So, and I'm gonna apologize. I don't remember all the names of the people in my group. I didn't write it down. But basically the two takeaways that we have, one, what stuck out as working well. It seems that what's in place right now that works well is that when people call in, the person who answers the phone finds out what issue is they're calling about, and then gives them information and resources that can help them solve their problem, and then refers them to a specific person who can help them, either a specialist within the organization, Homeline, or somebody else. So those are things that are working right now. And as far as like what's the wish list, or what are the things that we wish we had, one is a written document of policies and procedures that not only explains and standardizes how to handle complaints, needs, inquiries, and other issues when people call, but that actually gives a step-by-step action on how to handle the most common ones, how to talk the person through it, how to help them, what to do. And then just have that written somewhere where everybody can see it. Because right now there's seems to be a general policy. This is what we do. This is, you know, how you refer them, but there's no specifics. So for example, if you're having a rough day, right, and your own emotions are high for whatever reason, or you're really tired and you just can't quite remember all the specifics, you then have to like reach out to somebody else instead of just being able to refer to a document and handle it right there. Along with that too is transparency. It seems like if the people who called in kind of knew what to expect, that would be very helpful. If we could publish and share like those step-by-step actions that are going to be taken for these specific issues, or even just wait till they call in and then share that with them, send them a document, hand them a document, explain it over the phone. That way they know that we're treating them fairly and justly, that everybody who has this issue, this is what happens. And then later, if they have to call in for whatever reason, they can say, you know, I'm on step 6 or step 4 on this issue, on whatever it is, the step-by-step you said you were going to help me with. I'm on step 6 and I haven't been able to get out of step 6 for 2 weeks. Is there someone who can help me get out of step 6 kind of deal? And have that so we can all have that two-way communication. One of the things that stuck out to me personally when the ladies were talking earlier about their experiences was that they felt like the city needed to do their job. And I bet you a lot of those city workers feel like they were doing their job. And so there's that miscommunication there, is like, what is the expectation? And I think that if you had a document that explained it, even if it wasn't perfect, it could be argued over later and brought out. But so that transparency issue, and then rapid communication and a good complaint system, so that what they talk about doesn't get lost in translation. They don't have to talk to multiple people. Or if they do, those multiple people can then have all that information readily and contact them quickly so that they feel their needs are being met. And if anyone else from the group wants to speak up, that's what I got. So.
Thank you. And then did we have a group 6?
I can start off group 6 if my group members will promise to back me up on this one. But we kind of had a robust conversation on the first 2 questions, and we really didn't get too in depth with the third question. We did have representatives from both cities and from Washington County. So I think the roles that we play within our jurisdictions are a little varied just based on the authorities that we have. As far as sorry, I'm trying to pull up between 2 different documents right now, but as far as kind of how we approach things, you know, there is a certain amount of variation depending on the type of call. And what programs we have in place. Enforcing our rental housing standards is one of them. And so I think that's kind of the lens that the cities had. Brooklyn Park did seem to have some proactive programs in place going out and, you know, working with specific buildings where they're seeing a higher level of complaints. Actually proactively reaching out to those tenants to get their experiences, even if they haven't made a complaint. From Rich, maybe Julie, if I'm overstating this, but I would say from the White Bear Lake and Richfield perspective, I think what we're seeing is more kind of quality of housing issues that aren't necessarily specific complaints about discrimination, and determining, you know, if there's discrimination tied into that and fair housing issues tied into that is sometimes a little murky. We are a little limited in the powers that we have and what we can enforce. So being a conduit of information is one of the roles that we can play. And there was some, I would say, some of the ideas that we had in as far as making the process better for tenants would be having literature to hand out explaining what our roles are, what our responsibilities are, and what we have the power and authority to do. Probably adding to that would be what other resources are, and if finding ways that we can help make those connections instead of sending people out on their own. Since sometimes if we're calling in or if we're reaching out as a local unit of government, we might be able to get response a little bit faster or know somebody personally who can help us. In the licensing inspections, increased costs for those who are requiring multiple inspections because they've failed those basic standards of living. So kind of using the stick approach instead of the carrot at a certain point. Language, I think, is a barrier seen probably especially in more mid-sized communities where we have trouble recruiting employees into certain positions that can help with language barriers for immigrant communities. And so finding ways to help immigrant communities who English may not be their first language, helping them understand what their rights are and finding ways to do that would be another goal or another policy or practice that would be good for cities to have. And that's all I have. If anybody else from the group wants to fill in probably very wide gaps that I left from our conversation, that would be great.
I think that was a great summation of the conversation, and the basic difference between the cities and the Washington County CDA is that our agency owns rental housing. And because we're owners, we have staff that deal directly with residents. We're required to follow the fair housing regulations, and we inevitably will hear back about complaints through the political process if there are issues. So our discussion really focused much more on the cities, and Tracy did a great job summing that up. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, group 7.
Hello, this is Jason Newby. We had three individuals in our group, Pang Yang, who actually her and I work really close together in the same division, and then Maya from the Met Council. We spent a lot of time on Brooklyn Park, in specific to how does the city respond when someone complains. We have a pretty, like I think others have mentioned, a robust system. We have different divisions that in community development and our community engagement team that would potentially respond depending on the concern. We have an online complaint portal that hopefully directs rental property maintenance or rental housing concerns to the appropriate division, and there's no gap in who's doing what. And so that was launched here earlier this year, and so we're testing that out. We have, like I said, the complaint and routine inspection process. So concerns are typically identified during the routine inspection process, but historically that has been, I like to call it transactional. It's not really kind of addressing anything other than maintenance issues. And I think Shay had mentioned this as well. So our community engagement team, Shay and Brenda, I think are on, and maybe Carmen, but they partnered with our inspectors and they're doing door knocks. So there's a more proactive approach in the field now that we've launched at 3 separate apartment communities that is both in engaging on the front end with the residents, not having management with us or maintenance, so that trust factor is there, that open line of communication can occur. What we're doing with that is really listening and understanding the needs of the resident, understanding, do you have maintenance issues? Do you know how to report those? Connecting them both to the city portal, but also the maintenance request portal that the apartment community may have as well. We're finding that they do have systems in place that can text and email and provide status updates. That's where there's a disconnect within the city inspectors, is sometimes we don't know when a maintenance request has been made or if it's being followed up on. So our process is pretty clear, that we put a lot of onus back on the property manager and make sure that maintenance and that resident have a open line of communication and connection. If that doesn't take place, if they're not responsive, then the city does get involved. We open cases and respond to those issues. We reference the International Property Maintenance Code. And one of the speakers this morning had mentioned things like new carpet and appliances, and there's some limitations when it comes to minimums within the International Property Maintenance Code that we can enforce. So we're starting to look a little bit deeper into those things that might not necessarily be a violation, but impact livability for the resident. And how can we take those standards a little bit further? Let's see. What things do you wish you had in place? For us in Brooklyn Park, I think we can agree technology would be one thing. We have the ability to capture these requests, but really kind of following up and making sure that what we're producing and printing out and providing as inspection orders, that it's clear and readable and accessible. During our door knocks, like we are handing out resource materials, making sure that those connections are made, and just kind of end with the door knocks in general. And I think we will continue to do those, because it's really providing an opportunity for both community engagement and the inspector to cross-train, to understand both roles and how we can assist each other. With the inspectors going out there and just looking at maintenance issues, there's also the resource component and making that connection, and then circling back and making sure that there's follow through as well, because with the inspection process, that generally doesn't happen. So if there is a towing concern or a need for assistance or resources, that community engagement team member is critical right now, and we're finding that it's a huge benefit. So, Peng, Maya, anything to add?
No, I think that was great, Jason. That was a great summary of, I think, what we talked about.
Oh, yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Well, thanks, everyone. I know that sometimes breaking into groups can be a little bit of a pain, and then you get put on the spot to say things. But also, I think some really good stuff comes out of that as well, too. And some of the common themes, I think, you don't need me to tell you this, but across some of the groups are those questions about sort of time, responsiveness, communication, access to resources, being able to share or have transparency in your processes so that people know what happens after they contact the city, right? One of the things that I think can happen a lot of the time when individuals are interacting with systems is it sometimes feels like you're shouting into the void and then nothing comes out of it. And that doesn't mean that the city or the county or the state isn't doing something, but very often the people who made that initial contact don't necessarily have the information about what to expect or what happens next or how something got resolved or if it didn't. And so I think those ideas about transparency and communication are critically important. And then I can't overemphasize the role that talking to and engaging with communities can play, and just even understanding if there's an issue to begin with, and that idea of cross communication within organizations and cross training, so that when somebody is interacting with a city or a county or the state or whatever, they don't feel like they're knocking on a bunch of different doors, because very frequently when somebody contacts the city, they're contacting the city and they expect information to be shared across the city, right? That becomes something of an expectation. And when people have to sort of start over with every interaction with like this happened and then this happened and then this happened, then it sort of feels like frequently people are kind of stuck in place, right? Even if that's really not what's happening internally, because a lot of the time, you know, nobody has a way to be aware of what's happening internally, and Samir, that idea, like it sounds like the common problem is communication between departments. I think that is, you know, the bigger your system, the more different pieces there are to it. I think the more that information can then get spread out, and then a lot of the labor of sort of getting everybody up to speed ends up falling on the renter who contacted the city to begin with, and they've had a lot of the stress and labor of living in a challenging housing situation or experiencing discrimination. So having to sort of start over again every time, I think, can be uniquely frustrating for folks. So a couple of things that I think everybody kind of hit on in terms of those most common types of interactions are about issues related to property condition, issues related to parking, and then once again, issues related to kind of the sense of safety that people have in their homes, and the way that trying to achieve that sometimes also can have negative consequences for people. And I wanted to touch on a couple of different issues because I think that they are important for communities to be thinking about as you're engaging in, you know, whatever housing inspection system that you have. One of the things I will absolutely confess to is that I'm an attorney and I have a tendency to think about, I know, right? Isn't that awful? And I have a tendency to think about some of these issues through a legal lens, even as we're striving for things that people are achieving something that is more than that. That's about fairness and that's about belonging. But one of the tools that is in the toolkit for people who are experiencing substandard housing conditions that I think is very profoundly affected by city inspections systems or county inspection systems or state regulations is the right of people to basically bring legal actions to address housing issues. And one of the primary vehicles for doing this is called a tenant remedies action. And so what a tenant remedies action does is it allows certain types of individuals or organizations to basically sue to say, I am not getting what I'm paying for as a renter, right? Like we have an agreement that I get to live in some place that's healthy and that's safe and that meets property condition standards. I'm not getting that, and I'm going to go to court to enforce it. There are a couple of things that I think are important for folks to know about tenant remedies actions, and different cities have very different approaches in terms of their own role in it. The first is that it's something that is available to individuals. So if somebody is experiencing substandard housing conditions, they have a right to file a tenant remedies action, but it's a lot of work. And typically speaking, a tenant remedies action does require that somebody have legal representation because you are going to district court to say, hey, there's this issue in my housing and it needs to be addressed. Some of the things that people need in order to make a tenant remedies action claim or that can help are things like city inspection reports. So that renter, unless it's an emergency tenant remedies action, which means like your heat went out, you need it turned back on. But if it is a standard, there are issues in my building, tenant remedies action, they need to send a notice to their landlord that they need to make the repairs. It's usually a 14-day notice. And one of the very important pieces of proof that that they are entitled to go to court to get their housing issues addressed. This isn't a requirement, but it certainly helps in terms of addressing these issues, are city inspection reports. And, you know, one of the things that we find very frequently in work that we're doing, and as I said, I've said in the past, you know, a lot of the time when we're bringing a case, it's going to be sort of larger scale building wide case. And usually it's going to have some component of civil rights associated with it, as well as those consumer rights issues. A lot of the time, it is very difficult to get city inspection reports that are really clear about what the issues are in a property. And on the flip side of it, some of the inspection reports that we see that are initiated by renters calling and saying, hey, there's a problem in my building, tend to incorporate a lot of things that are about the tenant's behavior rather than about the physical condition of the building. So for example, we have been working on a case where, I mean, it's fine, it's going well, but the inspection reports, without any real prompting or additional need to say it, was talking about suspicions that there were additional people living in the unit who weren't on the lease. Well, the inspector had no way of knowing whether that was true or not. They didn't know if, you know, the sleeping bag on the sofa meant that somebody was an overnight guest. But at the same time, that's something that really was kind of harmful for the people who had brought the complaint to begin with. And once something like that appears in a city inspection report and then it goes to the landlord, then sometimes they feel a responsibility to like address that, even though that wasn't the thing that people were contacted about to begin with. And so what is contained in city inspection reports, what people are looking for very frequently, can be sort of a way that people can assert rights to the housing that they're paying for, and that complies with what's called the covenants of habitability, which are these sort of like statewide commitments that everybody makes when they're renting out housing, that housing is going to be suitable for the purpose that it's being rented out for, which is to be somebody's home. The second thing that's really interesting about the tenant remedies actions that I think can present some unique challenges is that they can be brought by individuals or they can be brought by a community-based organization operating on behalf of individuals in the building. But when a community organization is bringing that, they have a pretty high threshold that they have to meet. So they have to have written authorization of more than half of the occupied units in whatever building they're bringing the tenant remedies action for. And when you have scenarios where people are experiencing threats of retaliation or intimidation, whether those are real things that are being threatened of them or people because of their circumstances feeling like they don't have a sense of safety about bringing up these issues, it can be very difficult then to get somebody to say, yes, I am agreeing to this tenant remedies action. That presents the same kinds of barriers for individuals who are interested in bringing a tenant remedies action as well too. You know, whether it's an individual or somebody working, an organization working on behalf of individuals, either way, somebody is putting themselves out there as saying, I need this fixed. We are challenging what is happening in our community. And even though there are protections in the law against retaliation, sometimes retaliation can be difficult to prove. And there are a lot of different ways that people can be retaliated against that aren't super obvious and apparent at first glance. And so a lot of people feel very vulnerable then signing on to these kinds of things or bringing these actions on their own. The more that a city inspection report is really clear about those types of violations, I think that takes away at least a certain element of the fear that people have putting themselves out there. The third thing with tenant remedies actions, and certain cities have done this, I know we've got some folks from the city of Minneapolis on the line, for example, is that cities, counties, and the state all have their own ability to file tenant remedies actions. This is really important because when a city, a county, or the state files a tenant remedies action, they don't need everybody, they don't need the written permission of 50% of the people living in the housing in order to bring that forward. And so in that sense, there is nobody who is putting themselves sort of like individually in this position of being a target for retaliatory conduct because it's the city acting on the city's behalf. The other thing that's really good that can happen, particularly when you have either collective actions where an organization is working on behalf of a whole building or a city, is there is a power in tenant remedies actions, if issues are not going to get addressed or resolved, to have an administrator appointed to basically take over operation of the building to stabilize it. So if you've got a lot of longstanding deferred maintenance, if you have things where there is just not a sense that the current landlord is going to address the issues, courts can actually appoint a third party to operate the building in the interim until it's stabilized. That even includes the ability, based on a court granting it if it's requested, to actually take out loans or liens on the building in order to address some of those issues. So it can be a very strong and powerful tool. It's usually used by cities when you've got some pretty worst case scenarios going on. On the other hand, it is a way that cities can be very actively engaged and involved in addressing some of these issues if what you've done in terms of, issuing repair orders just doesn't seem to be moving the ball forward. Another thing that a number of people talked about that I think it's important to kind of pull out here is kind of that distinction that communities have between sort of being like responsive to renter initiated complaints or being proactive in doing regular inspections of properties. And both of these things I think can be very useful tools. Like you want to have the ability to respond when bad things happen in a property or somebody is sensing that their housing situation is not right and it's not fair. One of the things that I think we heard the speakers talk about, and then definitely came out in some of the discussion groups with folks, is that that's also something where, very frequently, if somebody complains and they're complaining about what is happening in their unit, then when a city inspector goes out and inspects the property, very frequently they're inspecting that unit that the complaint has been filed on. And so it's very easy for people to connect the dots between, like, I'm inspecting unit 102 and this person lived in 102 and they must have made a complaint to the city because they're coming out to inspect unit 102, right? So that on the one hand, you want to have transparency, and certainly for a lot of these things, individual renters, are requesting repairs from their landlords. They are sending in those notices. But sometimes when things kind of go up the ladder in terms of the activities or actions that are being implemented, or the kind of oversight of these repair issues, that shines a brighter spotlight on that individual and on that household. So things that both proactively are identifying, okay, this building needs an inspection rather than it being targeted at like just that individual unit. And certainly those proactive steps to reach out and do regular inspections can make a real difference in the lives of renters, to make sure that they're getting issues addressed and that issues of repair don't end up kind of like lingering and only being available for the people who feel like they have the ability to reach out and ask for things. Because when you think about it from a fair housing standpoint, very frequently the people least likely to ask are the people who have the greatest barriers to accessing housing. And that tends to be people who fall into one of the protected classifications. And so having just a responsive rather than a proactive approach, unless you've got some protections sort of built around that, then can keep people, particularly folks who are undocumented, for example, or people with disabilities, or Black, Indigenous, people of color households, or large families with children, from feeling comfortable even asking the city to take a look at a property, because those are frequently folks with the fewest options and the least access to choices when it comes to housing and communities. So then the way that we sort of think about that interaction between we're doing our job, right, which people are, and they're working really hard to respond, but also all the people who maybe aren't going to be able to call, and how you make sure that you're creating a situation where people feel safe and they feel protected. The other thing that a number of people brought up, which I think is important both on a kind of city responsive level, but also on a city policy level, is issues related to parking. And particularly when you have folks who are living in multi-generational families, or you have people who have caretakers who need to come by and maybe assist somebody in their housing unit. There are some pretty onerous parking policies that exist within properties that really impact visitability and really impact large families with children. So kind of keeping an eye out on that. There are a number of cases that have come out fairly recently that really talk about the discriminatory nature of some of the parking policies that exist within rental housing communities. But the other thing cities can do, and I think it's really a good thing to take a look at, is that communities can also be impacted by the on-street parking requirements in their surrounding community as well too, because sometimes a property maybe doesn't have sufficient visitor or guest parking. People want to park on the street so they can, bring dinner to their grandmother, but there is no parking allowed on the surrounding streets. A lot of the time that's because neighbors are distressed by having people park on the street outside their house, even if they have their own driveway or garage. But that does also have an impact on visitability, and it also has an impact on large families as well too. So I think taking a look at, if you're getting a lot of calls about parking issues, to think about it not just as what are the policies within that individual property that are leading people to be towed or to not feel like they can visit their relatives, but also looking at, what are some of those underlying policies that are put in place related to parking in the surrounding community, and are the justifications for having those policies when they were created still in existence today. And then the third thing that I want to talk about as well, just real quick, is issues related to it's called drug-free, crime-free, and nuisance ordinances. And this is a place where I think that interaction between city regulations, city inspections, and fair housing really comes together in a sharp point. And it's a place where a lot of communities, I think, struggle with how to draw the right balance. So everybody who's living in rental housing has a right to the same city services as everybody else. And that includes the right to call the police if the police need to be called, or call the fire department, or call the ambulance. And so that is just kind of a given, right? Like that's one of the public services requirements, that everybody has these rights. There was a period of time, and these still exist in many communities today, where cities were passing what are called crime-free, drug-free, or nuisance ordinances. And what they would require is that landlords, property management companies, agree to these policies, and they include in lease agreements that all of the renters in a property agree to crime-free and drug-free policies. And on its face, it sounds pretty neutral, right? It sounds like something, well, yeah, nobody wants to have crime and drugs happening in their property. But it has a couple really distinct negative impacts on particularly survivors of domestic violence, and then also Black, Indigenous, and people of color households, and people with disabilities, depending on how the policies are written. So many of them, what they'll do is they'll say that your licensing and inspections scheme will look at the number of emergency services calls that are made to or from a certain property. And based on that number of calls, some of the more kind of retrograde policies, and most of these have gone away, thank goodness, would essentially require the landlord to evict somebody if they had a certain number of calls made to the property. Now, some of them, it didn't even indicate whether those were criminal convictions or anything like that. Just the call was enough in order to be a ding against them. And if they didn't do so, they may have their license pulled, or they may have fines and fees that are going to fall on the landlord for not adhering to these crime-free, drug-free policies. And the natural consequence of this is that people who had to call the police, for example, or had the police called on them sometimes for doing nothing wrong, would end up in a position where they would be evicted from or pushed out of rental housing. Yeah, and Linda's right, children with disabilities as well. We have seen this a lot, particularly in households with children with autism, where sometimes, a child will be making noise and somebody will call, and that results in multiple dings being placed on their record, and then sometimes those people will be evicted. But the other thing that can happen with some of these crime-free, drug-free policies as well is it creates a barrier for people with certain things on their rental history from being able to access housing. In particular, folks who have been evicted in the past because of violation of crime-free, drug-free policies, even once again, if it's no fault of their own, or people who have a criminal background and in a country and in a community where arrest and incarceration rates for Black, Indigenous, and people of color households are significantly higher than white households, even though there is not a significant difference in who is committing crimes. That has been recognized by HUD, so criminal screening, as having a disparate impact. And so there have been, as I said, a number of efforts and instances, actually in the Twin Cities, there are a number of communities that have either significantly amended or repealed entirely the crime-free, drug-free, and nuisance policies because of the disproportionate negative impact that it was having on low-income renter households, particularly people with disabilities and people who had experienced domestic violence, because many of those calls were really as a result of their identity as somebody who had experienced domestic violence. And when you think about that through a fair housing lens, that is very frequently considered a manifestation of discrimination based on sex or gender identity. And so all of these things are, kind of part of the mix, I think, of what cities are encountering when people are calling you, but also some examples of the ways that some of these sort of local policies related to, or practices related to how we address issues related to, in particular, kind of these quality of life like maintenance or nuisance issues, can kind of translate then into people feeling like they do or don't have access to certain kinds of housing rights. So one of the things that we were going to do was break into another breakout session, but because of some logistical issues, we are actually not going to do that. We're gonna park that idea for our next session, which will be great. You learn something new every day about the quirkiness of Zoom, including if you don't download it onto your computer, then you can't get into a breakout room apparently. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit before we kind of wrap, well, first of all, I wanted to give a shout out to Linda, who wasn't able to join us for the panel this morning because she was dealing with some housing repair issues in her own building, which is just sort of the way of life very frequently for renter households. Linda, I don't know if you want to share anything just about, as you think about your own housing journey, what are some of sort of your expectations, or what do you want from cities when an issue occurs and you pick up that phone and you give them a call?
Thanks, Margaret, and I'm sorry I was late. I did live at Crossroads at Penn in 2015, and then in Bloomington up through 2018. And I'm on a Section 8 voucher. So I tend to call the city if something seems broken, or especially when a property is flipped, if it's very aggressive with the construction of the new owner, and they don't give us fair warning about paint fumes or other toxins, that kind of thing. And so I actually was the person who got fans brought in, notices put up, plastic walls hung, just by being fairly obnoxious, but that comes naturally, I guess. Right now I live way out in the country, and I'm learning to know my city. It's a village of 3,500 people, half of whom live on farms, and the level of housing upkeep is very low. And you can see that the apartments are aging, and need attention. But I don't think people have the same fearful factors that you're talking about in the metro area of calling in and being retaliated. But just, gosh, even to understand the owner probably doesn't have enough money, or that kind of thing. So it's terribly unique, I suppose, in every single city, and every single town. And if anything, Margaret and everyone here, I think town hall meetings, believe it or not, or summer barbecues, get-togethers, combining buildings, having churches provide open houses where if you're tabling different health-seeking behaviors, you can always have housing tables, and just information comes out, and it's mostly, usually about things that Homeline are doing, or who are your your transparency people, who you really can call. But I don't think we should always assume that we know it all if we're running the city. And I'll just say this really briefly, but when I left Bloomington, I really felt like I was dropping the whole story of that struggle. So I called the new housing authority director there, Erica Coleman, who is quite a genius. And I said, can you meet up with me and the new Port Authority lady from Detroit named Carla Henderson, which I had seen in a city council meeting online. And I said, plus there's this equity woman named Faith Jackson. Could we meet? Because I just have to ask you, and this is just me as a citizen with my own story saying, I feel like, how can I use what I learned in Richfield and Bloomington to keep helping? And so we set up a Zoom with 3 African-American incredible leaders, the head of the housing authority, the head of the port authority, and the head of the equity team. And what they said is, Linda, keep telling your story. Just keep telling, because your truth really matters. And, you know, I was so moved by that. And then Carla Henderson said, and by the way, don't assume anything, because the 3 of us as leaders in Bloomington have never been in the same room at the same time before, until you ask, could we please talk? And I mean, it blows me away to this day that, okay, I get it. Things are separated into different departments, areas, silos, and expertise. And so don't assume anything, you know, and throw open houses where you're tabling, or, you know, where you allow tenants like myself to, you know, tell a little bit of our story. And I missed the panel this morning, but you know, similar things to short panels where, and you do have to kind of hold our hand to get us used to speaking in public, and then we never stop after that. But you know, you have to befriend us a little bit and help us learn to say our story in very brief, pointed words, and to land it after about 95 seconds. So with that, I should probably stop because I've gone over 95 seconds. But trust your tenants themselves to tell their stories and the variety of reasons. Oh, I will say one other thing, because when I'm a battered woman, if I find out the police notified my landlord that I had to call for a separation or a removal or something for, you know, whatever, that shouldn't happen. That would make me hesitant to call the police to help me in a domestic. And so that I really am glad you brought that up, Margaret. And I don't know how many cities still have that, but HUD has that, because I'm a Section 8 voucher holder. If you have crime or drugs or violence under a guest or a household member, you really are at risk. And that's in all of our leases, and we already know that. So we're actually a good tenant you want to have in your city, because we know that stuff. But yeah, no, we would want anyone who is a victim to feel free to seek the help that they need. Is that enough? I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. You're never saying too much, so that's good.
Yeah.
So before we break for the day, just want to throw it out there for question and answer time. I know this was 3 hours, right? But it went by pretty fast because there is just a lot going on in the world and in the world of housing, and there's a lot to know and there's a lot to share. But want to make sure if people have any questions, they get a chance to shout them out there. You can either ask out loud or you can put it in the chat. Don't be shy. Okay, so it appears that we have collectively come together and answered all the questions, which is fabulous. Just to let folks know, as I said, this is the second in a 3-part series. Glad to see some familiar names this time around from last time. Hope if you weren't able to join us last time, you get a chance to watch the recording. We are working on scheduling the 3rd session, which is going to be a little bit more forward-looking and really thinking about how do we expand some of the policies and rights that people have to fair housing that is safe, stable, affordable, dignified, and free from discriminatory barriers. There are a lot of cities who have done a ton of work that we're going to have folks share a little bit of that. And there are a lot of ideas that I think are still percolating, which I think will be really exciting. Samir asked what the follow-up from here is. So we will send around a couple of things after this. It'll take us a couple of days to get things together. The first is some follow-up notes from this meeting. There are a number of questions that people asked and resources or organizations that people mentioned. We will share that as well too. We'll also be reaching back out to people when we pick a date for the next training. And then the other thing that we're working on is a few years back, Housing Justice Center put together a little bit of a fair housing guide that included a lot of resources for cities. We're updating that with the newest and best information that we can. Also, for anybody who really likes to nerd out, we're still eagerly awaiting the final affirmatively furthering fair housing rule coming out ahead. We're close, should drop any day now. And so that'll also be part of the next conversation as well too, as we think about the policies that people are putting in place. But the immediate next step is everybody who signed up today will be receiving an email, and it'll include some follow-up notes and resources for folks. And you are also now all on our list that we'll reach back out to when we schedule the next training for sometime in January. So before we break, just want to make sure, any other questions that people have? Good deal. Okay, we're going to do one more waterfall. Let's see how this goes. And remember, what you're going to do is I'm going to ask the question, you're going to type your word in the chat, and then when I count down to 1, you are going to hit enter. So they all kind of come up at once. Right now, I feel. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Enter.
I'm grateful.
Okay, lots of informed, lots of hungry, tired, empowered, motivated, prepared. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I'm actually going to send it to everyone, not just to Ellie, which I just did a second ago. I hope you have a great day, and I hope you join us for our next session. We'll let you know when it is in January. And thank you for spending some time with us this morning. Have a great one. Bye.
Thank you.